I discovered was that it is much less of a black and white issue than I thought. I mean, it really is many, many, many women from all backgrounds, all races, all everything have abortions, even pro-life women. And I think that was really the surprising factor for me, was how many women who would describe themselves as pro-life also have abortions. So it's not just it's not just what some people may think, that just a few isolated women who should know better, but many, 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 many women from all walks of life have abortions. Certainly that's part of the women in the pro-life movement who have had abortions. That's part of their story, is that they regret it for wherever they were in their lives at that time. It's something that they wish they hadn't done. But that's their story, and it's absolutely legitimate, and something that they have every right to share with others. But regret is not something that I heard from everyone by far. Women have complicated feelings about it. Some are grateful and yet still have sadness and grief. Some are just happy to move on with their lives. It's a spectrum, and I think that's something that needs to be honored as well, is that different women who come to this have many different feelings about it, and all of those feelings are legitimate. Well, I mean, I think they come from many different places with it, but religion seems to be one of them. It's not always the same religion. Some are evangelical Christians, some are Catholic. And certainly it's the ones who yell and who are kind of bullying. I feel we most often hear from them, and I think they're really not serving a purpose. I know that some of the pro-life women in the film talked about how that's not their approach at all, and that's certainly nothing that they support, is the sort of yelling and bullying of women, that they want to approach their work with much more compassion. And I certainly applaud that, because really there's no room for bullying and shaming women. There's no point to it except to be hateful. I mean, you'd think, they stand in what is a public area, and it's their right to, free speech, and they're expressing their views. But it does seem like women ought to be able to access the, health care that they want without having to face that. And honestly, it's not for the faint of heart. I mean, it really can be a rattling and upsetting and traumatizing experience, not just for the patients, but for the women who work there, for the escorts, for everybody involved. It can get quite ugly and be something that's hard to recover from. Well, I do think that, as with the film, there's a cumulative effect, and the thing that I really appreciated was how many women were willing to come forward, despite personal, despite what might be personal repercussions and blowback, which I hope none has experienced in the course of this film and getting out there in the world. But they did so at some personal risk, and they did so for other women, that other women might benefit, and not feel as alone or shamed, and know that they're are not bad people because they're having an abortion. And I'm deeply humbled by the women that came forward and did that and shared their story and were brave enough to do that. So I think there's a cumulative kind of effect that had on me, and I hope will have on audiences. I just, every day that I met someone during the making of this film who shared their story, I was moved. So it's hard for me to single out anyone and say, well, that's my that changed me the most. But I will say that being in the boot heel of Missouri, which is the most impoverished part of the state, and meeting women there who have very little access to health care, that was probably the hardest, to know how isolated these women were and how hard it was to access the care that they wanted. That was hard to see and imagine. Wow, that's in this country. This is the reality for these women, and it was very, very hard to see that. I met women in different ways. I mean, I was at the Hope Clinic, and usually it was someone working with the women who would let them know about this opportunity to share their story. And certainly I never wanted to coerce anyone or trick anyone to participate. This was all by invitation. And then if women wanted to share their story, they could. And again, I'm grateful that many women did want to share their story. There were many more that were grateful that I was making the film, but did want to share their story. They just couldn't. They couldn't go there. They couldn't do that. I mean, I think reproductive rights is often a very politicized subject. It's something that politicians talk a lot about, and there's a lot of rhetoric, but we very seldom hear from the patients and women directly affected. And so that was my goal with this film, was to really listen from a compassionate place to women directly and to share their stories. And so I hope that, whereas I don't think I'm going to change anybody's mind, and this is not an advocacy piece per se. It really is a film that tells personal stories, and I hope is an invitation to empathy, and that might shift the conversation from a political place to more of a personal place about something that ultimately is a very, very personal decision.